Hi, this is Ned Siegfried from Siegfried and Jensen. As proud sponsors of BeliefCast, we hope you are inspired by Todd's weekly podcasts, which contain so many courageous stories of recovery and personal growth. Remember, it's not what happened in the past that matters, it's what happens in the future. We invite you all to work hard and be optimistic about your future. Enjoy today's podcast.
Well, we are back, everybody. Thank you once again for tuning in. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Inspires BeliefCast. I can't thank you guys enough. We are trending on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts because of you guys. We've had amazing guests on who have shared some amazing stories. They're vulnerable. And because of that, guys, we are just doing great. We're ranked in the top 150 in the world in mental health. And so that to me is just amazing. We're trying to help people. And so thank you. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, Wasatch Recovery, Siegfried and Jensen, Veracity Networks, iHill Institute, and Living Interventions Recovery. And I want to thank all of you guys for being willing to support me. You guys are amazing, and I love you. Today, we are joined with an amazing human being and a light in this world. Her name is Leslie Weirich. Leslie, thank you for joining us today.
Well, Todd, it's just an honor to be asked to share our story on your platform. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing in mental health to raise awareness, and especially on the topic of suicide prevention that we're going to speak about today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a very serious subject. And yeah, Leslie, I know you're very busy. You're doing a lot of good in the world. And I'm honored to have you on the show. And folks, I'm telling you, this is going to be a tearjerker. It's going to tug on your heartstrings, but hopefully it motivates all of us to reach out and help the one who needs it. And I know sometimes we don't even know that. And Leslie's going to talk about that. So a little background on Leslie. She knows the highs and lows of life. And she loves to share both. She's had a successful career. She married the love of her life. She was blessed with 2 beautiful children, but she also knows incredible loss. And September 12th, 2016, she lost her son, Austin, to suicide, which we're going to talk about today, but among a bunch of other things. And she's a suicide prevention advocate, and she's trained in all kinds of areas in that field. And she has been speaking ever since. And one of my favorite quotes that I love that Leslie says, she says, "Telling my story to save lives is what gets me up and going every day." I love that. And she's going to share her story with us today. And so maybe, Leslie, where we start, and again, we're going to talk a lot about what you're doing, but why don't you just give us a little background, where you live, a little bit about your family dynamic?
Sure. Well, Todd, I grew up in Indiana, so I know you're in Utah. We're called Hoosiers here in Indiana.
The Hoosiers, yes.
So, the Hoosiers, right. Born and bred, went to Indiana University where I studied journalism. Now, I am the youngest of 7 children, so came from a very big family.
Wow.
My parents actually experienced loss very early, lost their first child to leukemia, a little girl when she was 5. And then, as my dad would tell everyone, I filled my backyard up with boys trying to get to another girl. So
right.
5 boys in a row, and then I came at the end.
All right. A nice bookend there. Yeah.
There you go. My husband says 5 older brothers. That explains a lot about my personality. But so I am the youngest, and I grew up with 5 older brothers in northern Indiana. Fort Wayne, Indiana was my hometown. Sort of lived all over the country with jobs, and have had just a really wonderful life professionally. And then we live now, my husband and I know that you're in Utah, we live in Amish community. So really, people laugh when I say this. I say there are more buggies than cars where I live. So I live in a very rural little area called Middlebury, Indiana. And as I like to tell everybody, we have 1 stoplight, and suicide knows no zip code. We have 1 stoplight, yet we've lost 2 teens in our town to suicide in the last year. Wow. So, so we can talk about it. It does not matter. Suicide, mental health, anxiety impacts us all. It's a universal thing. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Absolutely. And again, I'm glad you point that out, because we think that it's, just people that maybe have an issue that that can't be fixed. I mean, it
Right.
affects all of us. We all go through tough times, and
Right.
obviously this pandemic that we're going through, which even makes it more magnified because of the isolation and, being kind of cut off from the world. So, and the
Right.
connection. So, there's a lot we want to talk about. I want to say this before we get into your story. I've done a lot of research on you, and I'm so grateful that you're so willing, but you're a very driven woman. You've been very successful in business and stuff, but you've put that all aside
Mm-hmm.
so you could go be this advocate and to go
Mm-hmm.
help save lives with your story and what you've been through. And I just want to give you props. I admire that you're willing to be vulnerable like that, because that's not an easy thing to do, because
Mm-hmm.
you have to almost like relive it every time you tell it, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So I was a financial recruiter. And then we lost our son. Actually, we lost him on World Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day by sheer coincidence. He took his life. He was 20 years old. And a little background on my son, Austin.
Yes,
He
please.
Austin was what the world would call an overachiever. I mean, he looked like he had it all. Graduated above a 4.0 from high school, taking weighted honors classes, received $26,000 in renewable academic scholarships, was accepted to multiple colleges, played football, ran track, a two-sport athlete. He even received something called the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award, which is only given to one student in the entire high school. So, if there was an award or an achievement, he won. He was scholar athlete all 4 years.
Man.
Just you name it, he won. So by the world standards, Austin had it all: leadership, academics, athletics, it just everything. He chose to go to, there's actually only 3 colleges left in the United States that are all male. And our son decided to attend one of those colleges, which is called Wabash College. Okay. It's about 45 minutes west of Indianapolis. Very academically rigorous, very difficult to get into. You have to have a lot of extracurriculars, great grades, high SAT and ACT scores. Typical, very driven. They say, we inspire leaders. Wabash College builds leaders. So, those boys that choose to go to that school, they're on a mission to set the world on fire.
Right. Yeah.
And that was my son's personality, So as I say, Todd, perfectionism, I believe, is a part of a mental illness. And I think perfectionism is what ultimately took our son's life. And that's why so many people were so shocked when he did take his life, because when everyone looked at him, he would be the last kid in the world that you would ever think would make this decision. But what ultimately led to Austin's decision that evening was a relationship with a young woman. And I don't spend too much time talking about that, because I said, that was sort of the catalyst that evening. Yeah. But Austin's whole life was about masking depression and perfectionism. And that's really what I want to focus on when I speak to young people. And today to talk a little bit to you about, because I've been invited to do our very first my first TEDx talk.
Congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it's going to be March 26th, and it'll be at Austin's college. I have yet to go back there since he passed away, so it's going to be emotional since he was on campus when he took his life. And but my decision to go back there was one of really raising awareness for kind of what our culture does to young men when they have that drive to succeed and that drive for perfect grades, and that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost, Todd, to their mental health,
Yeah. I think, you touch on a point there. I think, like, even you see it a lot on social media. It's like, it's like grind, let's work hard. Let's, you push yourself. You can do anything. And on some level, that's a good thing. So we can kind of break out of a mold here and there. Right. But the pressure that puts on an individual, we don't know what's really going on and how that's affecting them. And then if I got to be perfect in order for me to feel like I fit or belong.
Right. And then, with young people growing up today, Todd, let's just throw social media in there, okay, for a minute. Yeah. So then they have to compare themselves to, athletes, and, I've got to look like, especially young women, I have to look like this, and so it's so much pressure. And I think the one thing that, I speak all over the nation, but I just spent the week before Christmas on Fort Bliss at the Army base in El Paso, Texas. I was invited there by the chaplain because they have had 20 suicides on that base this year. And those are young soldiers, the ages 19 to 23, 24. So I believe that, the key to turning around these suicide statistics in our nation, which are horrible right now, especially youth suicide, is we have got to build coping skills and resiliency into these young people at a really early age. I mean, you really can't start too young.
Right. No, I love that. Well, there's so many directions I want to take this, but I think it'd be good if we start with, and if it's okay with you, you received a phone call at 2:30 in the morning on September 10th. And if you can kind of just pick up the story from there and just kind of share what transpired after that.
Well, I wish it was a phone call, Todd. It was a knock on our door.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So as I tell everybody, my husband can sleep through almost anything, but not me. I'm a very light sleeper.
Yeah.
So, it was September 10th of 2016 and in a 2-story house. So all of a sudden at 2:30 in the morning, there is a ringing of my doorbell like my house is on fire and just a pounding on my front door. And, I jumped out of bed as quick as I could. And I woke my husband up who was asleep. And I said, someone's at our front door. And before he could even get out of bed, I was bolting down the stairs and I, sort of yelled through the door, "Who is it?" And I looked, there were windows on both sides of our front door. And as I said that, I could see the police car parked in front of our house. And I opened the door and the police officers, by that time, my husband was standing beside me and they said, "Do you have a son named Austin Weirich who attends Wabash College?" And I said, "Yes, I do," and they said, they gave me their card. They said, "You need to call the dean at the college. Your son has been in an accident." Now, those are words that no parent ever wants to hear, but especially 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
So we ran back in and we called the number and the dean of the college answered. And he had shared with us that Austin was with his girlfriend that evening and there had been an argument and our son had shot himself. And there was a very bad storm going on that evening. I mean, lightning, thunder, rain, like you couldn't believe. So they tried to get a helicopter in there to life flight him. He was still alive and they tried to get a helicopter in there to life flight him. And they weren't able to land. So they took him by ambulance 45 minutes away. And so my husband and I, we had, our daughter was 16 years old at the time. And of course, she was listening to all of this on our front porch. And we went upstairs to tell her that we had to get in the car and go to Indianapolis. We asked her to pray for Austin. We told her we'd call her and update her when we had more news. So we headed out for a 3-hour drive at 2:30 in the morning in this storm. And we got about a half hour down the road and my cell phone rang. And it was the emergency room doctor. And he said, he asked if we were on our way. And of course, I told him that we were. And, he asked if we could pull over to the side of the road so he could talk to us. And he said that the ambulance had just arrived with Austin. And he was sorry to tell us that there was no pulse.
Gosh.
And so, as I say, my husband, Keith, Austin's dad, who is really the most soft-spoken man I've ever known in my life, he just took his fist and hit the steering wheel and cried out to God and said, "Why, oh, why?" And we both just sat on the side of the road and then we drove on, the next 2.5 hours, pretty much in darkness. And that storm was just never letting up. And we got close to the hospital and Keith looked over me and he said, "It's like God is crying with us tonight." And I always say, I believe that he was, but as I tell everybody, people who are believers and people that, believe in more than we see here, is that we were about to experience love and mercy that night like I've never experienced in my life. And 5 years later, I can't even explain it to you. When we arrived, there was a chaplain that walked toward me and he took Keith and I to the back where we could sit down. And of course, the doctor and nurse both came in. And the first thing they asked us is if we wanted to see our son's body. And I really don't know where these words came from, but I said, no, because our son's not here anymore. And that's a decision that Keith and I have never, ever regretted. But where the most miraculous part of that evening came from was in our state, the way this happened, because of a suicide, someone has to identify the body. And so somehow, I say, in the depths of my grief, I seem to remember a very unique injury that Austin had on his left ring finger. And I started to describe it to the nurse and doctor. And the chaplain Paul, he spoke up and he said, Mr. and Mrs. Weirich, I'll go back for you on your behalf and I'll identify your son's body for you.
Wow.
And I said, what an incredible act that could have only been given to us by somebody that has walked in our shoes, because he prayed over us before he went back and really asked God to give us comfort the way that he'd been comforted 3 years earlier when he lost his 17-year-old son.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So, the whole night and then the blessing was we were able to harvest Austin's organs. So we were able to donate both of his heart valves, his corneas, and all of his bone and tissue. So that allowed us, before we left that hospital, to realize that families were getting calls that morning. Lives were being changed, lives were being saved. So it didn't feel like we left everything at that hospital. We felt like life was going on. And I said, I would really love someday to meet the person that got Austin's eyes, because he loved to read. Yeah. And I haven't done that yet, but I hope to do that someday. Sure. Yeah. And then we established, in 2 weeks, we had over $20,000 in a scholarship fund at his high school. So we have given away 5 high school scholarships, college scholarships at his high school in the past 5 years. And then past a year ago, I partnered with our community mental health center. I cover 2 counties, and I am the first suicide prevention specialist in these 2 counties. And we are implementing an evidence-based suicide prevention program called Sources of Strength in 4 school districts this year. And we're hoping to add 2 more by fall.
Wow. That's amazing. I want to talk about, that chaplain that went back to identify the body. You said, what a tender mercy that was. And, and a blessing that you needed in that moment of grief, of, tremendous grief. That's not even right, the word, but, as you're going through this in that moment and stuff, I know you and your husband are men and women of faith, and you rely on that a lot. How did your faith, obviously it was helping you in the moment, but how does that continue to maybe help you do what you're doing now and move in this direction of helping people?
Well, I know you have many listeners out there who have different beliefs, but we are people of faith. And one of the things, we did not have Austin's service for 2 weeks after he died, because we were trying to get family in, and people were kind of flying in from all over the United States and even out of the country. So his celebration of life, I decided, we're not going to talk about what happened in the last second of his life. We're going to talk about the first 20 years of his life and who he was. Yeah. And so I asked everyone to wear red. His high school and college colors were both red and white. Okay. So I decided I wanted everybody to wear something in red and white. I asked everybody, I sent it out through Facebook, we're going to celebrate Austin. In fact, a lot of people ordered his jersey, his football jersey with his number 37 on it. And it was a celebration. Yeah. But I really prayed. I didn't sleep much in those few weeks. And I prayed and I asked God to kind of show me, a direction. We knew within 24 hours that we were going to use our story. We knew very quickly. Really? Yeah. We had said, my husband and I, that if we ever had an opportunity to show people who we were, it would be at Austin's service. And so we did not run an obituary when he died. We just didn't. And we had 650 people at his service. We would have had 750 people, but his football team was playing that day. And I really kind of cried out to God, because I really wanted to speak about his life and who he was. Yeah. And so I am not a biblical scholar, but I opened my Bible to Genesis 50:20. And if you know Genesis 50:20, it's about Joseph and his brothers, but it says, you intended to harm me, but God used this for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many, many lives. So I claimed that verse. Little did I know how powerful that verse was going to become and be manifested in my life. But so I'd like to say that was the last tragedy, Todd, that college had on their campus. But on the 2-year anniversary, the first year on Austin's death anniversary, it's hard. It's World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. And we were just navigating through our grief, trying to get through it,
Yeah, sure.
So on year 2, I really I wanted to do something meaningful that day. I wanted to volunteer in an organization. So what I do, hospice is taking care of a lot of members of my family. So I serve lunch to the hospice nurses and social workers on that day.
Okay.
And so that's what I do. I volunteer on that day. So on the 2-year anniversary, which would be 2018, World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day, Keith and I were getting ready for bed. And I got a text message from one of Austin's former roommates at Wabash College. And he said, Mrs. Weirich, I don't know if you heard, but Evan Hansen, the co-captain of the Wabash football team, took his life today. And I'm sorry to have to tell you that today, but I didn't want you to hear about it on the news.
Yeah.
So that was just, and what came out of that was his parents, who we've become very good friends with now. Evan Hansen was 21 years old. He died by suicide on September 10th, 2018, 2 years after Austin's teammate. And so his parents very early, within a week, spoke to the Indianapolis Star newspaper. And they asked if they could include our story with Evan's and if they could interview us. And they reached out to us, and our backgrounds and our stories are very different, but we shared our story. And within about 2 weeks, I started getting phone calls from people and messages and emails asking me if I would share our story at a school or share our story somewhere. And then I was invited. I still laugh about this. I got contacted by the largest nonprofit in our state to see if I would be their keynote speaker that January.
Wow.
And I laughed at them and I said, I'm not a keynote speaker. I'm not, I have a story to share. And they're like, well, we really want you. And this organization puts licensed clinical therapists in schools. It's called Crosswinds Counseling. So my husband's like, yeah, I think you should do it. I think you should tell our story. So 3 months later, I get up there, and this was the 5th year in a row they had this fundraiser. And in 24 minutes, I took the stage and I shared our story. And Wabash College was there that evening. They drove 3 hours to hear me speak, all of Austin's teammates and roommates. And so I shared our story. And I don't say this to boast, Todd, but to raise awareness about how this impacts everyone. That was the 5th year in a row they did it. We broke a fundraising record. They raised $249,000 10 minutes after I left the stage.
Man, that's amazing.
At that point, and that was to put licensed clinical therapists in 25 schools in Northern Indiana. And at that point, I went, you know what? This story, I knew our story had power, but I thought this story has to be told again and again and again to save a life. Wow. And so, and then I started speaking, I would speak at youth groups, I would speak at schools, health education classes, just kind of wherever. And my first talk that I gave was to a group of young women. And at the end of my talk, a young girl I think she was around 17, ran out of the room. And apparently she was one of 6 children. I learned her story later. Apparently she had written 5 letters that afternoon to all of her siblings. She had a plan, she had the means, she had it all prepared the next day to take her life. And she came to my talk and she went home in tears. Of course, she turned those letters into her mom, and her mom called me. And she said, you saved my daughter's life tonight because of your story. She's not going to take her life tomorrow. And that young woman is a junior at Indiana University studying accounting right now. And I still keep in touch with her.
Well, if she's listening right now, we want you to know we love you, and Leslie loves you, obviously. And we're so glad you're still here.
I love her. I have a lot of stories like that now. I've been doing this 4 years. I have a lot of stories. So that's really why that's on my website, why I say that, because I just need one story like that. So when I was at Fort Bliss, I spoke to those soldiers. Once again, you have a recipe for suicide there. You have young men who are, have access to firearms. And then, you just throw in as I say, an immature prefrontal cortex, which is where, we can talk about that, where all those decision-making skills are housed. It's not fully developed till they're 27. They get emotional in a relationship like my son did. 19 out of the 20 suicides involved a relationship.
Man.
So, I went there to speak. I went there to share our story. We talked about the signs of a toxic relationship. We talked about gun safety. We talked about it all. We talked about their brain, their emotions, stress. And at the first evening I was there, I received an email through my website from a mom of a soldier. And she said, I don't know what you said today, but you opened up a conversation with my son that I would have never had until he heard your talk. So I know that there were the chaplains shared with me a lot of stories that week. So the chaplains told me I made their office very busy that week. so I said, good.
Yeah.
Good.
That is a good. Yeah. And again, that's why you're sharing. I want to, this is a quote from Leslie. She says, quote, I often tell people I'll never stop grieving my son, Austin. I will never stop tearing up when I tell our story, but I will tell it over and over again because it's saving lives. And that gives me tremendous hope. And this is exactly what you're explaining. You're having all these experiences and you're causing things to move, and help people in a direction that they need to go in. Love it.
Yeah. Well, the last school that I spoke at, Todd, I would say, right before COVID shut our world down, it was February 25th of 2020. And I was working full time as a recruiter for a financial institution, trying to get out of my lunch hour, after school, trying to speak in there. Just literally were not enough hours in the day. So I had already kind of been thinking about, I'm going to do this full time. It was sort of happening. And then, so I took a day off and I went to a high school in South Bend, Indiana, a charter high school right by Notre Dame, where I live pretty close to Notre Dame. And I started asking these kids if they would mind raising their hands if they lost a friend or a family member to suicide. And 3 90-minute health education classes, over half the hands went up, over half.
Wow.
And I told my husband, I'm like, that was my aha moment. I'm like, I need to get out and speak more often, but how can I do this working full time? So then fast forward 2 weeks later, COVID shuts the world down. And I still had 6 schools on my agenda to speak at. Yeah. So I told my husband, I said, this mental health crisis is only going to get worse now in this pandemic, especially with our young people being isolated. So, and I say this through the program that I'm working with in schools, connection is protection. We need to not isolate. So these kids, connection is protection. And we can talk about that. So I told my husband, I said, you get these kids isolated and, on their, social media, there's going to be a lot of kids that need support and help. So I started trying to do some trainings via Zoom and, I'm happy to do that, but my talk is very raw and emotional and it's most impactful in person.
For sure.
And so that's why I tell everybody, I'll fly wherever, I'll go wherever, but if I can do it in person, I prefer to do it in person. And then it also gives me an opportunity one-on-one to speak to them. They come up to me a lot after my talk and they want to talk, I've opened up things. And so, so then, fast forward, we're getting through COVID. It's not getting better. By October of that year, this is October of 2020, I get a call from the CEO of our community mental health center. And she said, I just listened to one of your talks. And she said, would you be interested in coming over and having a conversation with us? We don't have a designated suicide prevention program here. And I want to talk to you about it. Well, that was music to my ears, right?
Yeah, right.
So, I mask up. It's 2020, right? I go over there. I'm in this big boardroom sitting at one end, socially distanced. And, I thought I have nothing to lose here, Todd, right? I have nothing to lose. And so she said, what would you do if you could have just one thing? What would it be to impact and reduce the amount of teens and young people who are losing to suicide? And I said, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that question for a while.
Yeah.
I would put an evidence-based, and I'll explain this, upstream approach to suicide prevention in every elementary, middle, and high school as fast as I could. And she said, what do you have in mind? And I said, I was waiting for that question too. Because 3 years or prior, a year after Austin died, I was blessed to hear Kevin Hines speak. I don't know if you know Kevin Hines, but he's the most famous suicide survivor in the world, jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived.
Yep.
So I got to hear him speak. Oh, he's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I got to hear him speak in person at this high school. And after he spoke, I got to hear about this program called Sources of Strength. And I was like, we need that in every school. We need that where I live. You know, this was another county. Yeah. So I presented the program. I told her how it worked. I explained to her everything. So I joined our community mental health center. I just had my 1-year anniversary this week. I joined the community mental health center as the first suicide prevention specialist in 2 counties, Elkhart and St. Joseph County, where I live. And we are raising the funds and implementing Sources of Strength in 5 school districts this year. I'm hoping we just got funding. I'm very blessed. Last week, I got a call out of the blue. There's a group called the 100 Women Who Care. You probably have it out in Utah too. So it's 100 women who put in $100. They raise $10,000 a quarter. Wow. And then each nonprofit, you pitch your program to them, right, Todd? Yep. And then they can vote on what program they want to give that $10,000 to. Well, the way it works is you're supposed to be there that evening. You're supposed to present your program, right? So last Tuesday evening, out of the blue, I get a phone call. I don't recognize the number. I'm tired. I don't pick up my phone. It's dinner time. A minute later, I get another phone call. I recognize that number. I pick up the phone. They're like, you need to call this person at this number that just called you. I said, okay. So I called the number and they're like, we are at the 100 Women Who Care meeting tonight. We presented Leslie's Hope and we voted to give you $10,000, which is 2 more schools this year.
Dang,
and I wasn't even at the meeting.
You weren't even there.
I wasn't even there. So next week we'll do the check presentation and I'll get the $10,000. That's enough to almost fund it depends on the school size. It's roughly about 5,000-6,000 a school, depending on the school size to implement it. But that's enough to get 2 more schools set up and running.
Wow, that is amazing. That is, and again, I know why they gave it to you. One, you have a story you're telling, but man, your passion, I mean, people listening right now can feel, I'm feeling your passion here. Your passion and your desire to help other people is infectious. And I'm telling you, I'm feeling it. And I think that's why you're having all these people reach out to you. They're willing to give money and whatever. So I just want to, I love your passion.
I appreciate that. I have a really dear friend who lost her brother to suicide years ago, and he battled a lot of severe mental health issues. And her family has opened up an organization called the Carriage House in her hometown. They do phenomenal work. But she came to hear my keynote one night, and she said to me, you know what it is? She said, when your pain meets your passion, it becomes your purpose. And I said, that's it, because my pain's not going to go away, Todd. I can't rewrite my story. That doorbell rang at 2:30 in the morning. But, I am a woman of faith, and I tell everybody, we all want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. But I also want that old enemy to go, man, I knocked on the wrong door that night. Because of what happened, I want so many young people to still be here and still be standing and still be doing great things in this world. And, we need to help our young people know and give them. And we always say it's not enough to prevent suicide. We have to make this world worth hanging around for and living in, you know? So that's what we're trying to teach these kids. And I can share a little snippet of how that program works if you'd like me to, and tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, please do. And then I've got another couple of questions around Austin's perfectionism I want to get into.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, this program, the reason that I love this program, 2 reasons. Number one, it's peer-led. The students run it. So I love that the students take ownership of their own mental health, right? And their own wellness. It's a suicide prevention program that rarely mentions the word suicide. It's really a wellness program, Todd. Okay. Because when you teach wellness, you prevent suicide. When you teach wellness, you prevent bullying. You prevent those things. So it uses 8 protective factors that we all have in our lives. Some kids might have 1, some might have 2, but they can build out their wheel. We call it the wellness wheel. And those protective factors are family support, positive mentors, positive friends, healthy activities, generosity, spirituality, physical health, and mental health. So we say the first things are the who's in your life, which are your family support, positive friends and mentors. And then what we do, healthy activities and generosity and spirituality, and then physical health and mental health. So what we do is we work through the kids with their life. What does that look like? Because we know family can be a pain factor for a lot of young people.
Yeah.
So it could be chosen family. It could be, so we work through everything on that wheel. And then these kids, what we do is the students are nominated to be peer leaders. And what we call a peer leader, you're an influencer in your group. So we want to take 10% of the student population and nominate them to be peer leaders, and we train them. So a lot of times we'll have a teacher say, oh, you don't want him as a peer leader. He's a behavioral issue in my class all the time. And I'll explain to these teachers, I'll be like, but he's an influencer in his group. So we do want him, but we want to flip the script and teach him a different messaging. So what we want to do is we want to take a diverse population of the students, 10%. Then from there, we have adult advisors who can be teachers, coaches, community leaders, youth pastors, whoever. For every 7 to 10 peer leaders, we have one adult advisor. And then we give them an all-day training in this. We train them for 6 hours, an all-day training. And then we set up twice a month where they meet, and we give them a budget to do a PSA campaign. So these kids that are peer leaders, so they can get the message spread throughout the population of the school. So these kids might do, TikTok, I know it's not always positive, but it can be positive. So these kids could do a TikTok campaign like, what's your generosity look like this month? Or, what's your source of strength this month? So we give them a budget to run in a perfect world. In a COVID world, we're going for 6 campaigns, but we'd like them to do at least 9 PSA campaigns in the year. Then we bring in a speaker at the end of the year. But here's the data point there, and then we can move on. A peer leader, another student, is 4 times more likely to identify a student who's about to harm themselves earlier than an adult in the building.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So you want to break those codes of silence and let those kids know they have trusted adults. So those peer leaders will take that to those adult advisors. And that's where you start to change the culture and prevent suicide.
Wow. That sounds like an amazing program, like honest. And it's all great, but the one that really stood out to me is the generosity, going out and doing something for someone else. In my line of work, I always say, if you master the first 11 steps of AA, you'll drink again. If you master step 12, you'll never touch another drop. What's step 12? Giving back and helping someone else. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell the kids when we get to that on the wheel, I go, generosity is my superpower, and I tell them, I say, here's what generosity looks like, and I'll talk to them about all kinds of things that they can do, I'm like, what generosity can be. You see a friend in the hall and like, they're really struggling and having a bad day. And you can go put your hand on their shoulder and be like, hey man, how you doing? How's it going? I'm like, that's generosity,
Yeah.
So generosity, my 2 favorite things on the wheel, I like all of them, but are generosity and mentors, because mentoring, January is National Mentoring Month. So I talk a lot about mentors.
Oh, I love it. Well, I want to talk, just because I think a lot of people struggle with this, is you talk about perfectionism.
Yes.
And Austin struggled with that, trying to live up to a certain standard. Just tell us what your perspective of that is, and how do we kind of navigate through that and not, be caught up in perfectionism? What would you say?
Right. Boy, in our culture in the United States, and I'm just going to speak about the United States because I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's my platform. And I work with a lot of people in the UK, and I think they're very ahead of us on mental health over there.
Yeah.
But in the United States, I think our culture is, we are so caught up in making sure our kids get into the right schools and the GPA is above 3.75. And in the long run in life, is that really going to matter, Todd? Is that really going to matter?
No.
And, so I'm really big on social emotional learning and teaching our kids, empathy, teaching our kids these life skills that they need, because, at the end of the day, life is hard. And look what we've just gone through in the last 2 years. I wonder how my son would have weathered this COVID storm, because, he was a perfectionist. And so to give you a little glimpse of Austin and who he was, every night before he went to bed, he would reorganize his book bag and he would clean it out daily.
Mm-hmm.
He would set it by the back door so it would be ready to go the next morning. Like everything had to line up in a row. And he was just hard charging, hard driving, would work out an hour longer than anybody else in the weight room. Well, what that cost him was his mental health because, bless his heart, he was great with children. He was great with older people, but in his peer group, he pushed people away because nobody could measure up. Nobody was good enough. If they didn't do things the way he did them, then they were lazy or they were a slacker. So I think we have to be really careful as parents. And I know parents, and I'm not judging anyone's parenting style here, Todd. Sure. I guess I need to have that disclaimer. I say, I'm not a perfect mom. My son took his life. But I said, learn from our story. Please learn from our story. Your kids, the greatest gift. And I was just on a podcast with immigrant moms. I'll share that one with you. And I told them, I said, because your kids come here, and I said, they come into this world hardwired with a personality. And I said, the number one gift that you can give your children is to teach them how to fail well. How to fail well.
Love that.
Because here's the thing, resiliency is the number one thing that helps people in their career, in college, in high school, throughout our life. And look what your story is. Look what my story is. So in order to realize that, your failure is not a failure. Your failure is actually part of your education. It's part of your education to get you to the next step. And I will share with you briefly. So I did a Facebook Live with the Immigrant Moms Group. They have built this phenomenal group. It's based out of Dallas, Texas. And the woman that started it, she's an attorney. She started it because these immigrant moms were coming to the United States and putting so much pressure on their kids. And if you think about it, we have a lot of people, a lot of physicians, a lot of doctors are Asian or Indian. And she said, they come to this country and they say, you will go to medical school. I didn't bring you to this country to bring me a C's. You better bring me A's. Yeah. And so that takes a toll on their mental health. So they're having a real uptick in suicide in that culture and their kids right now.
Sure.
So I spoke on this Facebook Live and they said, if you could talk to the immigrant moms about anything, I said, I know you came here for your kids to have a better life, but guess what? We all grew up here and we want our kids to have a better life too. That's every parent's dream. Yeah. But I said, the very best thing that you can do is to step back. Failure is not fatal. Failure is going to teach your kids how to, get back up the next time. But if you're there to catch them before they fall, then you're not helping them. And so I said, the one thing that I would say about these parents that have kids in every sport, every activity, want their kids to be perfect, it is going to take a toll long-term on their mental health and their emotional well-being.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I saw that in my son. If he would have a breakup with a girl in high school, he would just emotionally plummet. It was the end of the world for him. There was no other girl going to come around, and it was the last girl. And I'd say, Austin, you are young. You are just figuring out relationships. But, he could not accept failure of anything. And it ultimately cost him his life. And I say, Todd, no one dies of suicide. Their circumstances are different. Their backgrounds are different. What leads up to that moment is different. But it does come down to that split-second decision in that moment when they cannot see to the next moment that things are going to get better. So I always tell everybody, if I can give these kids real world tools, and what I give every student that I speak to is I give them the text crisis hotline wristband. That's leslieshope.org, and it says text home to 741-741. I get those funded. I take them small, medium, large. I'll take 500 of them in February to a freshman academy, and every student will have them. Some of them will come up and ask me for extras for their brothers and sisters, because I say to them, if you think you have no one to talk to in this world and no one cares about you, look down at your wrist and text the word home to 741-741. And in less than 5 minutes, and there's two powerful tools that I'll tell you for teens, because teens are impulsive. Young people are impulsive.
Sure.
One is the text crisis hotline, which I love. Text the word home to 741-741. Because when people say, why don't you give out the suicide hotline number? it's 10 digits and they're not going to dial it. We have to speak to them in the language that they can understand.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
So in July of this year, we will have a 3-digit suicide number, 988, but it's not ready yet. So that's why I don't give it out. Yeah. When it's ready, I'll put that on my wristband.
For sure. I love that.
So I give them that, and then I give them a wonderful free app called Not Okay. You can look up notokay.com. I can send you that link. The Not Okay app is a simple GPS locator. They have to put in there up to 5 trusted adults in their circle, and the adults have to accept so they know they're in their Not Okay app. And it's a covenant agreement they make with an adult. So if they're at a party, they get in trouble, or they have a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend, they break up, they have said, I will not harm myself and I will not move. I will click Not Okay. And so if there's 3 people in there as their trusted circle, or 5, it sends out a message like, I've got Todd, I'm on my way. So the other people in the circle know. And so between the Not Okay app and the text crisis hotline, it's just their go-to. So when they're in that moment of crisis, those are the practical tools that I leave them with.
Dang, that's amazing. I love that. And I think that's a great way for someone who is struggling to immediately get some help in that moment. And again, you talked about that. I think you said it, connection is protection. Yes. So when we're, because usually when we're going through something hard, we just at times feel alone. But if you can click that and you got your top 3, 4, or 5 people who got your back coming to see you and get you, you're connected again, right?
Yes. And I think I learned that. I started speaking to about 3 years ago. I was at a large youth group, probably about 150 kids. So somehow or other in that, I said, this is a judgment-free zone. I want you guys to know what we talk about in here stays in here. It's safe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want you, if you've had a day in the last 2 weeks, there's 150 kids. I think it shocked the 2 youth pastors. If you've had a day in the last 2 weeks when you just thought, life is so hard, I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow, I want you to raise your right hand.
Mm.
It was a sea of hands time, a sea of hands. And then I said, okay, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to tell me, if you had somebody you could talk to, judgment-free, no questions asked, they just listen to you, be there for you, would you reach out to that person if you had that? I want you to raise your left hand. They did. And so they each went out of there with the wristband. I said, you guys have it on your wrist now. Wow. In under 5 minutes, a trained counselor will text you back. You sit still. They will just assess that you're safe. Then you can choose what you want to tell them. You can talk to them about what you want, but it's getting time between that impulsive brain, because this is an important point I need to bring up on this podcast. I don't believe any suicidal teen, young adult, older person ever wants to take their life or die by suicide. I don't believe they do.
Yeah.
I believe that they are so overwhelmed with pain in that moment. They don't know how to stop the pain. So what they are trying to do is stop the pain. And the only solution they have is by ending their life. They don't want to die, but they want to stop the pain. The pain's overwhelmed. And young people, as I say, the prefrontal cortex is your higher level reasoning, decision-making, impulse control, anger management. That's not, psychologists and research used to tell us it was fully developed at 25. Well, guess what, Todd? Now it's 27.
Mm.
So, I have a PowerPoint. I show my son when I talk to teens, I said, if you look at Austin, he was 240 pounds, 6'4", big, strong defensive end football player. But you know what? He had 7 more years for his anger management, impulse control, and decision-making to be fully developed.
Yeah.
So when push came to shove in the heat of an argument that evening, he made a poor choice.
Yeah.
So getting these kids to pause in that moment and either text a number or click that Not Okay app, that's a life-saving tool. Because then once you can get them to what we call, you can co-regulate and help them manage their anger, anxiety, sadness, whatever it is, the big 3 emotions. Once you can get them, sit with them, let them talk, de-escalate the situation, they may never have another suicidal moment in their life like that again.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful.
So it's keeping them safe with those practical tools like the Not Okay app and the text crisis hotline.
Wow, it's beautiful. I love it. I love what you're doing, Leslie. It's amazing.
Thank you, Todd.
You know, I want to, you know, I mean, you've got all these resources and this and that, but I'm going to ask you another tough question, but you've already given us some great advice. But if there's one person listening to you right now in this very moment who is in that dark place, and maybe they don't have the wristband or a thing like that, what advice could you give that one person? What would you tell that person who's in that dark place right now?
I would tell them that we've all been in that place. I would tell them that and I tell my kids, if you are thinking about suicide, you are not crazy. You are not weird. You are not stupid. You are normal. Mm-hmm. We all feel that way at times. We all go through those dark moments. But I will tell you one thing, hold on, because I promise you, as bad as you feel right now, it is not going to last forever. You are not going to feel this way 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, tomorrow. And so I want you to hold on to hope. And I want you to know, don't isolate. Make sure you've got a person. And I have t-shirts that say, find your person, because I talk very much about the importance of having a person in your life.
Yeah, for sure.
It's super important for these young people to know that person needs to have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. It can't be your 14 or 15 or 16-year-old friend, because they're still working on their prefrontal cortex getting developed too. But it has to be someone who has weathered some storms. We talk about that, having a mentor. And I think this is an important thing. And for you also with your podcast listeners. So January is National Mentoring Month, but Todd, listen to this statistic. So Forbes magazine did a study of the people that were like the top in their field, like the top hip hop artists, the top attorneys, the top firemen, the top doctors. What they all had in common, their common denominator, was they had a mentor in their life that they kept throughout growing up. But here's an interesting statistic about mentoring. So 80% of all people who develop a mentor when they're young, like I'm going to say high school, college, and keep that mentor in their life, keep a relationship with that mentor, will never develop a substance abuse problem. Do you know how many, and 50% of suicides involve drugs and alcohol?
Yep, absolutely.
So if you can say 80% of people will not develop an addiction if they keep a mentor in their life, if they get it early in life and they keep it in life, and 50% of suicides involve drugs and alcohol, you're essentially saying a mentor prevents substance abuse and suicide.
Wow. That is amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And very well said, and great advice for the one who's listening right now, because I know there is someone listening right now.
They're not alone, Todd. I want them to know they're not alone. I want them to know that if they can hear me, and they have a phone, please text 741-741. You can text anything I say, text home, it's short, but please text that. Please know that you're not alone. There are people that love you, even though right now you feel alone. And try to connect, try to find someone to sit beside you and just listen to you.
Yeah, beautifully said. Wow. Well, man, I could talk to you all day. Your passion, seriously, is so infectious. I love what you're doing. And there's no doubt you are going through this for a reason. And it's unfortunate you have gone through some loss, obviously, but it's amazing. I want to refer back to the scripture you mentioned, Genesis 50:20. I want to reread that. Sure. You intended to harm me, but God decided to I'm going to repeat that. Sorry, I just butchered that. You intended to harm me, but God decided to use this for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Wow. And that is you. And I want to thank you for being willing to come share a portion of your passion and story of what you're doing.
Thank you,
Todd. I want to tell you just how much I admire you. And I want to thank you for being an advocate to helping those who are suffering.
Well, thank you, Todd. And I think I want to make sure that every young person, anyone who's dealing with suicidal ideation knows that, there are so many resources. So make sure that you always have someone you can text.
Yeah.
And in this summer, we'll have a 3-digit number that you can reach out to, because so many times I tell everybody, you don't need to be a licensed clinical therapist to save a life,
Right.
but you need to have a set of ears. And I always say suicide prevention begins with listening and with your ears. So just sit down. You can't fix it. And I think an important point I need to bring up before the end of this, you cannot give someone the idea to take their life by asking them about it. If the thought is not there, you can't put it in. So what you can do by saying, are you thinking about suicide? You can let them know that you notice their pain, and you can open a door for them to talk. And that is the most life-saving thing you can ever do.
And great. That's a great point. You know, if someone wants to reach out to you, Leslie, that's listening to this, they want to know more about what you do, what's the best place for them to go to know more about you?
Sure. Well, I have a website. It's Leslie's Hope, and that's just one word, no apostrophe, LESLIESHOPE, leslieshope.org, because I always tell my kids, it only takes 1 second of hope to be here tomorrow.
Dang, love it. leslieshope.org, guys. You heard that. Please reach out to her. You will see all the great things she's doing. She's certified in so many different areas in this field now, and she's out there obviously doing good and saving lives. And it's unfortunate we have to go through some loss sometimes in order for stuff like this to happen. But I do believe that, you know, it's a gift at the same time. And I know that sounds weird, but man, having Leslie do this, you really are a gift to this world. And I'm honored to be, I'm looking at you face to face, even though it's through Zoom, but it's so great to see you. And I love your passion.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you for allowing me this platform to hopefully reach out. And it's my hope and my prayer that you and I together saved a life today. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, there you go, folks. I told you this was going to be amazing, and it's going to tug on your heartstrings. And please reach out to Leslie. If for some reason you can't track her down, reach out to me and I will forward that information to her, and we will do whatever we can to help you. I love you guys. Thanks to my sponsors once again. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Please share this episode. If you think you have a son or a daughter or a niece or a nephew or anyone you know, and if you're even afraid to talk about this, send them a link to this episode so they can hear Leslie's passion and hope, and that will open the door for a conversation. Remember, connection is protection, and we got that straight from Leslie's mouth. Love you guys, and Leslie, thanks again.
Thank you, Todd.
Till next time, everybody.